Man, oh man, does the city of Toronto seem hell-bent on making housing less affordable and making existing property owners significantly wealthier. So let's talk about why I think pre-construction prices, or why I know pre-construction prices are going to go much higher in the near future. The first reason is inclusionary zoning. So as of 2022, we're going to have inclusionary zoning here in Toronto. What that means is 5 to 10% of most new condo developments. So any new condo developments above, 100 units will be required to reserve 5 to 10% of the units to be affordable rental units. By 2030, 8 to 22% of new condo developments will be required to be affordable housing. You may read that and say, well, that's a good thing. This adds to the rental pool. It gives us affordable units for the people who qualify, which are, individuals making less than $60,000 a year. So at first glance, this should actually improve affordability in Toronto because it's, we have a massive shortage of affordable rental units. We have a huge wait list. So this will help that in a big way. And of course, the city is very excited to say this is not going to cost the city any money. We're not going to have to use any tax revenue, any property tax revenue. We're not going to have to spend a penny on this. The developers will fund this as a requirement in order to even build. And that's where it gets tricky. When someone says a developer will fund it, what they're really saying is the buyers of that development will fund it, because ultimately developers operate on very tight margins. If you talk to any developers in the city like I do, they'll all tell you the same thing. In the last 10 years, the profit margin in Toronto on pre-construction developments, despite rising housing prices, has gone down, not up. And so this is only going to make that worse. And if you're curious, just like I was, what is affordable rent in Toronto? These are the numbers here. So most of these units will be classified as CMHC 80% affordable. And so they'll be in this category here, which means that a one bedroom currently rents $11.45 a month and a two bedroom at $13.30 a month. So considerably below market rent. So how does a development happen in Toronto? Well, the developer goes to, they buy their piece of land, they zone it, approve it, or if it's already zoned and approved, they get their unit mix and all of their floor plans drawn up, and then they sell it. They sell 75-80% of the building. And then they are eligible for a construction loan. Just like you and me, the developers do not have, with the exception of a few, like a very small select few, they don't have the cash on hand or can't allocate the cash in order to build the thing. So most of them are obtaining debt, construction financing in order to do that. To get that construction debt, they need to hit a minimum profit target, usually somewhere between 15 and 20% on their pro forma to get that loan. So what you're seeing here in the profit margin section, 7 to 13%, this is from Altus and from Rad Marketing. This would be adjusted to final close, right? So when the building's finally done, after unexpected costs and delays, which all cost money, what is the end game profit margin, right? But in order to get that construction loan, they need that 15-20% margin, which, by the way, is coincidentally why projects cancel. Most of the time, projects aren't canceling just because developers are greedy. They're canceling because they couldn't get the shovel in the ground too quickly, construction costs rose, and the margin's gone. So they pre-sold their units at a value that they can no longer honor because they just can't get the construction financing. So it's very important that margins are achievable. Any new housing supply is entirely contingent upon there being enough profit margin for it to be economically feasible. So when you buy a new condo in Toronto, on average, about $160,000 of that goes to the government, both municipal and federal, in the form of taxes, development levies, that kind of thing. Development charges are up massively already in the last 5 years. Construction costs are inflating. Land values are up as well. So what does adding this affordable housing component really do? It's just another form of tax. Ultimately, that's all it is. If previously you had 500 units and you could sell all 500 units, well, your pro forma is based on that. Now you're getting, a 500 unit plot of land and you can only build 450. So you have to adjust your prices, your pre-construction prices, because you still have to hit the same profit margin, right? You still have to achieve that 15-20% on paper to be able to build the thing. So now you have to increase those pre-construction prices that you're going to charge buyers like me and you, 5-10% more in order to make up that difference so you can still go ahead and go through with the development. Why is this an issue? Well, to me, this is an issue because a tax on housing to create more housing is incredibly backwards. Obviously, there's no world where that nets out to be more affordable over the long run than incentivizing building. At the end of the day, it's just a disincentive to build. So essentially, you're further creating more supply constraint on the market, right? Put it this way, if developers right now already have to charge 20% above resale asset market value in order to hit these profit targets, where do you think prices are going to be when inclusionary zoning is part of the picture? Obviously, they're going to be higher. And if the market can't bear that, well, what does that incentivize? Well, that incentivizes developers sitting on the land longer. So buying the land, zoning and approving it, and waiting 2 or 3 years for the market to appreciate so that they know the market can bear the price they need to charge to go ahead with the development. In order to achieve this inclusionary zoning requirement, right? So ultimately, all inclusionary zoning does is it disincentivizes building. And our whole issue in Toronto is that we're building too few homes, right? You look at Canada as a whole, you say 2010 through 2020, we built 800,000, we immigrated 800,000 more people than the previous decade while building 300,000 fewer homes. This is the issue in Canada. This is why housing affordability is where it is, and this is why housing is appreciating at 7-8% a year compounding over the last decade, is simply because we're not building enough. And of course, our new immigration targets are going to make it even harder to build that supply. And now you have inclusionary zoning, which you're just throwing on top of the mess of, like, look, these development charges in Toronto are some of the highest, if not the highest in North America. 20 to 22% of the cost of a new condo in Toronto is government-related fees and taxes. And do the developers get a break on those government charges, like development charges and taxes and fees, in exchange for including inclusionary zoning, in exchange for including affordable units? No, of course not. They still got to pay those fees. They still got to pay the same taxes. Nothing changes except now they're down 10% inventory. Now, inclusionary zoning isn't the only issue. It's a big one for me, and I think it's the most backwards policy I've seen in a long time. But if you look at construction costs, they're also inflating rapidly. Now, this report is from the US, but you'll find that the numbers are the same, if not worse, in Canada. The labor and material costs on new home construction has gone up 22% year over year. And this is a tweet from a developer, a friend of mine, Julie, who builds quite a few condo buildings in Toronto. She knows of sites where developers are hesitant to even launch as pricing of new product is uncertain because of pressure on costs and supply chain problems. Once again, just proof, if the developers are uncertain on where their profit margin is going to line up, they're just not going to launch. They're just going to sit on that land and launch it later, which brings less new housing supply to the market, which means that the existing housing stock appreciates faster, right? Here's another tweet from Jeremiah. If you think hard costs, meaning construction costs, were bad now, 23% of the new construction labor force are boomers and retiring within 5 years. Forecasted only 6% of new labor is coming on stream. So it puts us at a deficit of 17% here. So these these labor and material costs are going to go even higher. And then now we also have inclusionary zoning. So once again, the margins are getting tighter and tighter with no relief, and development charges, inclusionary zoning, basically the cost of doing business in Toronto is going up considerably quicker than the actual market itself. So it's going to be increasingly hard to be able to sell your pre-construction projects at prices that are actually feasible. And like I said, look, supply is the issue in Toronto. If you're not familiar with months of inventory, it's it's one of the most valuable indicators to track in the housing market. So months of inventory just essentially is a function of supply and demand. How many listings are on the market versus how many sell in a month. So if you have 1,000 listings on the market and 500 sell in a month, you have 2 months of inventory. It's a way of boiling down, are we in a seller's or buyer's market, and how aggressive of a seller's or buyer's market, right? How much inventory is there? If you have 2 months of inventory, it means that if ostensibly no new listings come to market, all of the existing inventory dries up in 2 months. Anything below 3 months of inventory is regarded as a seller's market, where you'll see appreciation. 3 to 6 months of inventory or so is a balanced market, and then 6+ months of inventory is a buyer's market. You can see right now, condo inventory, we're at 1.4. Freehold inventory in Toronto, we are at 1 month of inventory, which is incredibly shallow, right? So to give you perspective on these numbers, like Manhattan's condo market has 7 months of inventory. Miami has over 10 months of inventory. We have 1.4. And if you go back through history, just for all housing types in Toronto, You go back to the 90s, 3 months of inventory, 2 months of inventory. You go to, let's check 2008 during the height of the financial crisis. 6 months of inventory, 7 months of inventory, 7 months of inventory. You know, you look now, we're at 1 month of inventory, 1.4 month of inventory. Been in a seller's market for a long time, even through COVID, right? So it's without question. Nobody can argue that supply is adequate in Toronto. We've had a supply issue for quite some time now. And I only see it getting worse with these new inclusionary zoning, with the development charges going up further, with supply chain issues, with construction costs inflating, and so many people in the trades retiring. I think inclusionary zoning is a terrible plan, and I think it's certainly not going to help affordability. It is just a further tax on new development. It's a disincentive to building, and this is part of the reason I'm incredibly bullish on housing. The cost, replacement costs, so new housing cost just keeps inflating. So less and less new housing supply gets completed, meaning that the existing housing supply goes up in price. And then, of course, our increased immigration targets is just fuel to the fire. So that's it for this week, guys. I will see you guys next video.